I've been asked to make a quick project, preferably a bag, and this is what I've come up with. Not only is it very quick, you could probably make this in an hour or two maximum. It's a very affordable way of making a bag as well. I've only used 5 of a 6-pack of fat quarters and some Bosal foam stabiliser, and I've got lots of fabric left over as well. So it's a great project for a beginner, but I think you'll agree it looks really, really stylish, and that's whether you're going to take it to school or college, take it to work, take it shopping, or even take it to the beach. So let's get sewing. I took one of the yellow fat quarters from the pack and cut it in half, and then I cut a border which was about 4 or 5 inches from another contrasting fat quarter, and sewed the 2 pieces together, and do that twice so you've got 2 squares basically. This is actually the lining section. So you've got 2 of those, and then to get the angle that goes kind of out at the sides like this, fold your fabric in half. So remember, at the moment you've got a square, and then measure 2 inches from the corner and cut diagonally from that line to the top corner. And then you can trim the whole thing down. So the top of my bag measures 17 inches across. The height of my bag is actually 11 inches, and that makes the bottom of my bag 13 inches across. So I need 4 pieces. There's 2 for the lining, and then 2 for the outside of my bag, all exactly the same size. And do make sure when you're cutting the front and the back sections that you line up the panels, so that, because those are going to be sewn together, so you need to make sure that the seam across the 2 different panels actually meets, and that's going to make it look nice and neat. Okay, now then, what I've done with the outside of the bag, when I cut it to size, I use this as a template to cut 2 pieces of Bosal foam stabiliser, and this is the single-sided fusible. But before ironing it onto the back of my fabric, I then trimmed it down by 1/4 of an inch all the way around, and this means that when I come to sew the bag together, I can sew through the fabric as the seam allowance, so I'm not sewing through 2 layers of Bosal. Some sewing machines don't like it. It is very flexible, although it's firm, it'll give a nice firmness to your bag. A lot of machines will sew through it, but because it is so thick and there's 2 layers there, it tends to want to fight back against your seams, so you don't get a nice crisp seam, which is why it's easier to actually cut it back. What I've also done, as you can see here, is to top stitch just along either side, and I've done that after I've put the Bosal on the back of the fabric because the stitches really sink in. Now, if you wanted to do a little bit of quilting at this point, quilting on Bosal really does look lovely because you get so much texture. So maybe you've got a free motion embroidery foot on your machine, just do some flowers or squiggles or hearts or whatever you like on there, or even just sewing in straight lines really does create a nice effect. But this is a quick project, so I'm going to get on with it. Right, so front and back, both the same. 2 pieces of the lining, both the same. Then we've got the base. Now, the way that the base works, I'll show you how I measured this as well, actually, because maybe you want to change the size of your bag. My base piece is 4 inches wide, right? And because the side seams need to wrap around the base piece like so, my side seam, my base seam here needs to be the whole of the length of the base and then the width here, so those 2 would fit together. So I know that the base, remember I measured across here at being 13 inches, so if I take my 4 inches off there, which is the width, then I know that the rest of my base has to be 9 inches in width. I hope that made sense. So 1 piece for the lining, and then I've got another piece for the outside of the bag, and again I've put the Bosal on the back of this and trimmed it down with that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. The final little bit of preparation is the handles. So this time I've cut 2 lengths of fabric. They're 2 inches wide and they measure 18 inches in length. And my Bosal this time I've cut down to 3/4 of an inch, and I've already fused that. I've left my 1/4 of an inch either end, and I've fused that to the wrong side of the handle. Then what we're going to do is to wrap one side, you can see that's just to one side of the centre as well. wrap one side of the fabric over the edge of the bosal and press it. On the other side here, you're going to fold the edge of the fabric over, and then we're going to wrap that over so that it overlaps and you get a nice neat seam down there, and then we'll sew. To make it a little bit easier, you could put some spray or stick adhesive just across there to hold the fabric down as you sew. Now, pins and bosal don't really go together, so if you do need to hold the fabrics together at all, use clips. So I don't really need to on this, but you can see how the little fabric clips are so much easier than trying to pin on thicker fabrics like this. Okay, let's get sewing. Right, so I'm using a stitch length 3, and I'm just going to sew across the seam here, and in fact I'm going to sew down both sides of the strap. Don't need to sew down both sides to hold the thing together. But it just looks nicer, it looks more symmetrical when you've got the 2 rows of stitching there. So again, just folding that edge over as we go. Oh, there we go. Then I'm going to turn around and go back down the other side. Then we're going to take our front and back sections of the bag, and we're going to sew these right sides together. Again, I'm aligning the seam where the border goes across the bottom. Where have you gone? There you are. And I'm just going to sew along the edge of the bosal. You may find it easier to move the needle position. I'm just reversing the stitches there to make that a nice strong seam for when you put the base in. Do the same on this side. Now you can add pockets to your bag if you wish. Do that before you start constructing. Patch pockets excuse me, on the outside would be really useful, or maybe just a couple of pockets on the inside. Right, so I've got a big tube. So what I need to do now is put the base in. So I'm going to fold my fabric in half and just put a little crease in there. You could mark that with a marking tool if you wanted to. Do the same on that side. And that's the point where the base needs to meet the side seams. And I will put a pin in the seam here. And then the same on the opposite side. In there. And then that's the way that it's going to fit. Right. I'll find it easier not to pin all the way around, to be honest, but I will start on that edge bit. Now this is what I'm saying about bosal kind of wanting to fight back a little bit. Oops. So just make sure that your seams are lined up, or your edges are lined up. Start and stop with the needle in the down position. Push all of this lump of fabric out of the way. It's just this area here that we're concentrating on, the bit that we're actually sewing. I'm just going to shorten my stitches a little bit across here. So I'm going to get to the corner of that bow stole there and stop. So I'm not actually sewing, if you can see that, I'm not actually sewing right to the end of the fabric, I'm just sewing to the edge of where the bow stole is. And then lift your foot up and turn everything around. Again, push this lump of fabric out of the way, line up your edges and sew. Stop with the needle down if you need to turn. If you didn't want to use foam stabiliser, then you could use a fusible fleece, polyester wadding, interfacing, maybe a bag interfacing, so something that's quite firm. There we go. And I'm just going to keep sewing all the way around in the same way. So I've sewn the base in, popped it the right side out, so you can see how nice and neat that looks across the bottom. And how that bow stole just makes the bag really stand up really well. It kind of makes it look expensive, doesn't it? Like it's a shop bought bag. But we need to line it, so we need to do exactly the same with the lining as I have with the outside of the bag. So again, take the two side panels, line up that join and sew down the sides. A little bit of a tip for you. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If I sew slightly wider, only a tad, a small amount wider than my 1/4 inch seam allowance, it'll mean that the lining actually sits inside the bag a little bit better. So, not a lot, we don't want the lining to be too small. Let's sew down the opposite side here. So again, line up the join. There we go. And then, as I did with the outer bag, let's take the base, fold it in half, give it a squish and pin. And the same on the opposite side, so fold in half, crease, pin to the seam. And sew. Now obviously I'm not sewing around bow stole here, so what I am going to do is to stop sewing a 1/4 inch before I reach the end. So I'm going to stop with the needle in the down position, lift up and pivot around. And back down the second side. Again, if you're not too sure, if you've not done anything like this before and you're a little bit worried about the base not fitting or not sitting squarely in the bottom of the bag, then you could always pin all the way round, or you could even tack by hand, which is a little bit time consuming, but at least you know that you're on the right track, that everything's going to fit together. So let's take that pin out as I come around the corner. And again, when I come to each one of these corners, I'm stopping a 1/4 inch before the edge of the fabric. I'm not going right up to the edge of the base fabric. Now in the last side that I'm just coming to, so stop there, I'll need to leave a gap so that I can turn the whole thing the right side out. So I'm going to sew away from the corner by 3 or 4 inches and sew backwards, and then I'm going to rejoin 4 or 5 inches along the line. Into this final corner, spin around, always stop with the needle down when you're sewing, and finish there. Right, so now I've got the lining that looks just the same as the outside without the bosal, and this time I have a hole. There we go. So, oh, that's a bit small. I might have to make that a little bit bigger when I turn it the right side out. We'll see how we go. Right, handles on next. So, really, wherever you think they look good. As long as they're the same distance from either side, and they're the same on each side of the bag, doesn't really matter, it's up to you. So I'm just going to sit this against my ruler so that I know I'm getting them central. And I think I'll have my handles 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 5 inches away from the edge at either side. What I need to do is to sew these facing downwards. So I'm going to pop a clip in here, make sure that the handle isn't twisted as it comes up to the other side, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 inches from that side. So now I don't need the ruler anymore. If I turn the bag over, I can see, or I can match where the straps are on the back like so. Again, make sure the strap's not twisted. And to this side. And clip, and then I'm just going to sew on the sewing machine to hold those in place. So quite close to the edge. This is just so that I don't have to sew around with clips or pins or anything when I come to put the whole bag together. Just keep my clips out of the way. And the same on this side. It's a nice size of bag, this as well. You know, if you like to take your own bag when you go shopping, and you could put an even longer handle on this. So you've got shoulder straps instead. And of course, if you wanted to put a fastening over the top, you could easily put just a flap of fabric right over the top with a big button on there, or a magnetic snap, but we're keeping this one simple. Okay, so the next thing is to put the whole of the bag inside the lining. So the lining's still inside out, the bag's the right side out. So when I put these two together, the right sides are facing each other. Make sure the handles are pointing downwards. And that the seams are lined up at the sides. I know I say it a lot, but if your seams are perfectly matched, nobody's going to notice. But if they're not, they will. There we go. Shan't pin all the way. And then we're going to sew all the way around the top of the bag. You could take your accessory compartment off if you wish to use the free arm on your machine, but this is quite a big bag, so I don't think I need to do that. I'm just making sure those handles are tucked out of the way. Line up the raw edges of the fabric. And sew. And again, I'm just touching the top of the bosal. I'm not actually sewing through it, I'm just using it as kind of a guide. There we go, over the handles. Take the pin out as I come round to the side seam. Where are you? There you are. Still making sure that they meet. Yep. And we go. So although I've made this in well, obviously a very bright, summery, beachy kind of coloured fabric in bright yellows and blues. Imagine how this would look if it was denim, or if you used a laminated fabric. So you've got a white clean bag. You could use a faux leather. That would make it look very expensive. Or just a plain calico. You know, any kind of fabric that you want it to be. I like working with 100% cotton. Stretch fabric isn't advisable for a bag. You'd have a bouncy bag. Right, just make sure that's straight. That's looking good. And then we need to turn the whole thing through that rather small hole that I left. But we'll try. I think we might do it. Ooh. Maybe the hole's now a little bit bigger than it was before. Right. So let's just push that bag out again. Oh, we're looking good. Let's snip off those threads. Put some here as well. Okay, two things left to do. So I have a hole in my bag, so if you pull the two sides of the gap, the edges kind of fold in, and I'm just going to sew, oh, it's out of the way thread, straight across the bottom to close that up. Then we'll push the lining inside the bag, so let's open this up, push that down. Now, because I only sewed through the fabric over the top of the bosal, it's not fighting back. If I'd have sewn through the bosal, then the lining would be popping up. But the seam's sitting really nicely on top there. So one final thing I'm going to do is to just sew all the way around the top of the bag, and I think that just gives it a really nice, professional finish. So just with a straight stitch, let's go. So I'd normally press this before I start sewing. Go up to the side. Just pulling the lining so that it's flat on the inside, because you will see these stitches on the inside of the bag. So I'm just pulling it away from the seam, just to keep that seam nice and flat. There, so one final little trim of these threads to make it neat. It needs a final press, and that is my bag finished. See, how quick was that?